Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by Miranda Devine. She's a columnist at the New York Post and the author of the book Laptop from Hell. Miranda, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
So you have this new piece out in the Post today saying that this was, quote, the least surprising news of the decade. I'm talking, of course, about the pardon, but a lot of people have questioned the timing of it. It seems to many to have come earlier than other presidential pardons. Why do you think Joe Biden did it now?
Well, I think it's pure and simple because Hunter Biden was due to be sentenced in Delaware on the gun charges in about 11 days, and then a few days later in California on the tax fraud charges. And so I guess he wanted to preempt the sentencing, which, you know, if you look at average guidelines, he was up for, something like 3 years jail on the tax and maybe something similar on the guns.
So he said he wouldn't pardon him, of course, and he said he wouldn't commute a sentence either. Do you think he always planned on pardoning Hunter, or was this a last-minute change of heart?
Oh, yes, he always planned on it. And that was the only way that you can see Hunter Biden and his lawyers' sort of reckless tactics legally. And I think, the only surprise to me is that anyone is surprised that Joe Biden would lie. What this whole saga has taught me is that Joe Biden lies all the time about everything and always has. And so lying about whether he would pardon his son or not is just par for the course.
Do you think, though, he thought, well, if Kamala Harris wins, then I won't have to do the pardon, and he was sort of caught up short on this? And I do want to ask you about this because you had great reporting about what the Biden's weekend in Nantucket was like, including them going to a restaurant called the Den of Thieves, which is, I mean, you couldn't write that, could you?
Thieves. Yes, you couldn't make it up.
So did anything happen in the last 48 hours that would have changed Biden's mind on any of this?
No, look, that's the narrative that's being spun from the White House, and that various gullible souls at CNN and MSNBC have swallowed hook, line, and sinker. That, Joe Biden, honest Joe, a man of his word, my word as a Biden, was determined not to pardon Hunter. But then over the Thanksgiving weekend, he decided that he had to protect his son because he saw this outrageous 52-page document released by Hunter's lawyers that claimed that Hunter was the victim of, political persecution, that the prosecution was driven by Joe Biden's enemies. And in fact, in Joe Biden's statement on Sunday night, he alludes to that. I mean, he uses much of the same language. He says, my son, was only prosecuted like this because he's my son, and anybody similar would not receive anything like this. And, that's the story. And I guess you can't blame him for trying it, but I think you'd have to be a complete fool to fall for any of it. Hunter Biden certainly was singled out and given different treatment from any other American, but it was favorable treatment. You just have to listen to the two IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler, who testified to Congress about that 5-year investigation in Delaware into Hunter Biden, run by David Weiss, then the U.S. attorney and now the special counsel, and to hear their terrible tales about obstruction and slow walking, the Department of Justice protecting Joe Biden, refusing to allow them to follow any evidence trail that led to the president himself. And there was plenty of it. And they were not allowed to, for instance, get search warrants for a cottage on Joe Biden's property that Hunter Biden had been living in. They weren't allowed to geolocate phones when Hunter Biden claimed in a WhatsApp shakedown message to one of his Chinese partners that his father was sitting next to him and was wanting to know where the money was, and that would punish them if they didn't provide it straight away. Other search warrants, the prosecutors tipped off Hunter Biden's lawyers And then this all culminated in this outrageous sweetheart deal for Hunter, where he was going to, get off with a slap on the wrist, not even that, which all fell apart in court. But it fell apart, and then Hunter was charged only because the IRS whistleblowers had come forward and disrupted those cozy little plans between the Department of Justice and Hunter Biden's lawyers.
Right. So I'm talking with Miranda Devine of the New York Post. She's the author of the book Laptop from Hell, which deals with part of the Hunter Biden saga, which I guess will continue here. What about other Biden family members? Does this have any implications for Jim Biden or any other people who might get caught up in congressional investigations?
Look, I think it's a pretty fair bet that Joe Biden will pardon Jim Biden, and he'll probably do it in the usual timing, the last day or two of his presidency before January 20.
But he hasn't been charged with anything, but he will just give him a blanket pardon, you think?
Well, he's being investigated, and that's been going on for a very long time. And he was involved in a lot of Hunter Biden's exploits, the influence peddling that was going on in China, some of those China deals. He wasn't involved in Ukraine, but there was enough there, I think, for Joe Biden. And there's no political stigma for him because he's already, blown the stack on Hunter. And he's given Hunter not just a pardon, but a pardon back 11 years. This is unprecedented. It is the most...
And it's for everything. It's for crimes that he hasn't even been accused of, correct? I mean, it's just
for
anything he did in the last 10 years, he's off, right?
Everything. And that
Wow.
includes, he's gone back not 10 years, but curiously 11 years. And that's because in April of 2014 was when the whole Ukraine grift began, when Hunter was paid $1 million a year for serving on the board of that corrupt energy company, Burisma, in Ukraine.
So, as a journalist who's followed the Biden saga, as I said, and wrote about it in the New York Post and wrote about it in your book, what do you think this tells us, if anything, about Joe Biden's legacy? Do you think it'll taint him in any way, or do you think it's just, boy, here's a guy who stood up for his son in his son's hour of need?
Look, I think it can't help but tarnish his legacy. His legacy should already be so tattered that there's impossible to shine at all, but there still are people hanging on to the belief that he's honest Joe and a good family man and high decent and high moral standards. But I think this is just so on brand for Joe Biden that it's impossible to see it in any other way but as corrupt and as a protection for himself, because, of course, he was involved in that influence peddling. The more important issue, I think, though, is the cover-up by the deep state, and that is probably, regardless of pardons, what you will see the new Trump administration going after, because that really is a threat to the Republic, having the CIA and the DOJ and the FBI and the IRS and the State Department all colluding to censor stories that were derogatory about Joe Biden, like ours in the Hunter Biden laptop story just before the 2020 election. That was a letter written by the 51 former intelligence officials, most of them CIA. That really was a domestic election interference operation by the CIA, because you had the then CIA director, Gina Haspel, sign off on that letter, give it the green light, allow it to be published just 2 weeks before the election. And specifically, it was created for the purpose of getting Joe Biden off the hook during his last debate with Donald Trump. So I think that investigating all of that corruption of those institutions and those security agencies is probably the priority for Trump.
And in terms of those investigations, as I understand it, I'd love your view on this. By receiving this pardon, Hunter Biden cannot plead the fifth in a congressional investigation, so that if he's called to testify against his father, he cannot sort of step aside and say, I can't do that because I might incriminate myself, because he can't incriminate himself. I mean, is that true, first of all? And is it possible that Biden will do a whole bunch of other pardons of people in the Justice Department in order to sort of quell any further investigation?
Mm-hmm. Look, I'm not sure on the latter that he can really do that. But I mean, he'd have to identify people like Lisa Monaco or whoever that he thinks have done the wrong thing. I mean, if you accept a pardon, you're admitting guilt. So I'm not sure that would happen. And as for Hunter not being able to plead the fifth or, say that he needs immunity from prosecution, I think he's still not immune from state prosecution. So
Right.
I think he'd very likely be able to claim that. I mean, the Bidens are nothing if not slippery.
Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Miranda Devine of the New York Post. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.